need notebook paper today. As soon as you get out your sheet of notebook paper, go ahead and copy down problem number 1. Yesterday, we learned how to divide polynomials using long division. Today, we will be dividing polynomials using synthetic division. Now, synthetic division just eliminates us having to actually do all of the long division. So we are still doing the division, it's just we're using numbers only. We won't be using the variables. So, when you are dividing using synthetic division, the first thing you have to do is take the constant in your binomial and change the sign. So negative 6, we need to change it to a positive 6. So if it's a negative, change it to a positive. Now the second step you need to do, you need to write the coefficients across the top row for the first polynomial. Now make sure whenever you change the sign right here, make sure you put half of a box around it to separate it from our row of coefficients. So for the row of coefficients, for 1x squared, we need to put a 1. For the x, we need to put a negative 3. For the constant, we need to put negative 18. So make sure the sign goes with the value. Now skip some space, we need to have a second row of numbers, and draw a vertical line. Now what you need to do first is the first coefficient needs to be dropped down. So drop down your 1. Now outside numbers get multiplied, so we need to multiply 1 times 6. That gives us 6. Now combine these. Negative 3 and positive 6 gives us positive 3. Multiply the outside numbers. So 6 times 3 is 18. Now we add again. Negative 18, positive 18 is 0. Now when you get to the final number, I'm going to put half of a box around it, and this final number is always your remainder. Now when you're writing your answer, you can't just put the 1 and the 3. That doesn't make sense. Now what we need to do is we need to have some variables with it. So when we're writing our variables, you drop it a degree. So the highest degree in the problem was x to the second. So if I drop it down, this would be x to the first plus 3. So that's my final answer, x plus 3. Now if the remainder was something other than 0, we'd have to do what we did yesterday. So plus remainder over binomial. But if the remainder is 0 like this problem, we don't have to add 0. Problem 2, go ahead and copy it down. We have 2x squared plus 7x plus 3, and that trinomial needs to be divided by x plus 3. Now you could do long division, but we will be using synthetic division. So for synthetic division, take the constant in the binomial and change the sign. So notice this is a positive 3. I need to change it to a negative 3 and put half of a box around it. Now the first row is going to be the row of coefficients for the first polynomial. So for the 2x squared, put the 2. For the 7x, put the 7. For the constant, put the 3. Skip a row and draw a horizontal line. Now always drop down the first coefficient. So the first one is always dropped down. Then outside numbers are multiplied. So negative 3 times 2 gives me negative 6. So that goes in the next hole. Add these together. 7 and negative 6 is positive 1. Multiply again. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Add again. 3 minus 3 is 0. And this final number is always your remainder. Now when you're writing your answer, drop it a degree. So if this is 2x to the second, this would be 2x to the first plus 1. So my answer is 2x plus 1. Problem 3. Go ahead and copy down number 3. We have 6x squared minus 5x minus 6, and that trinomial needs to be divided by x minus 2. Okay, problem number 3. The first thing we need to do is take the constant in the binomial and change the sign. So negative 2, change it to positive 2. Now across the top row, put your coefficients for the first polynomial. So for x squared, put a 6. For x, put a negative 5. And for the constant, put negative 6. Skip a row, draw your horizontal line. The first coefficient is always dropped down so that we have something to multiply. Now multiply the outside numbers. 2 times 6 is 12. Negative 5 plus 12 is 7. Multiply again. Outside numbers are multiplied. 2 times 7 is 14. And adding these, negative 6 and positive 14, gives us 8. Now this final number is always the remainder. Now when I write my answer, drop it a degree. So if this was 6x squared, this would be x to the first. So this would be 6x plus 7 plus remainder over binomial. If you have a remainder, make sure you add remainder over binomial. Okay, copy down problem number 4. We have 3x to the fourth minus x to the third plus 5x squared plus 7x minus 1, and that needs to be divided by x plus 1. I want you to do number 4. Okay, let's check problem number 4. The first thing you need to do is change the constant in the binomial. So in the binomial, we have x plus 1. So the positive 1, we need to change that to a negative 1. And put half of a box around it, just to make sure it doesn't get confused with our coefficients. Now for the coefficients, for x to the 4th, we put a 3. For x cubed, we put a negative 1. Don't forget the negative. The negative needs to be dropped down. For x squared, it's positive 5. For x, it's a 7. Our constant is negative 1. Now skip a row, draw your horizontal line. The first coefficient is always dropped down, so drop down your 3. And outside numbers get multiplied. So negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Combine these, you get negative 4. Multiply your outside numbers. Negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. Combine these two. 5 plus 4 is 9. Multiply your outside numbers again. Negative 1 times 9 is negative 9. Combine these two, we get negative 2. Multiply your outside numbers again. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. Combine these, we get positive 1. And that last answer is always your remainder. Now when you write your answer, drop it a degree. So if this is x to the 4th, this would be x to the 3rd. So this would be 3x cubed, and drop it down again, minus 4x squared, plus 9x minus 2, plus remainder over binomial. Number 5. Copy down problem 5. We have 5x cubed plus 6x plus 8, and that trinomial needs to be divided by x minus 1. Step 1, take the constant in the binomial and change its sign. So negative 1, change it to positive 1. And block it off with half of a box. Now for your coefficients, for x to the 3rd, we need to put a 5. Now every term has to be represented. Well, we have x to the 3rd. Do you see x to the 2nd? So if it's missing, you need to put a 0. So for x to the 2nd, we're putting a 0. For x to the 1st, we're putting a 6. And then our constant. So if you have any powers that are missing, make sure you put a 0 for it. Skip a row, draw your horizontal line. First term, first coefficient is always drop down, so drop down your 5. Multiply your outside numbers. 1 times 5 is 5. Adding these, we get 5. Multiply again. 1 times 5 is 5. Add these again. 6 plus 5 is 11. Multiply your outside numbers. 1 times 11 is 11. And combining these, 8 plus 11 is 19. And that last number is always your remainder. Now when we write our answer, drop it a degree. So if this is x to the 3rd, this would be x to the 2nd. So this would be 5x squared plus 5x plus 11 plus remainder over binomial. Last one, problem number 6. Number 6, we have 4x to the 5th minus 129 needs to be divided by x plus 2. I want you to do problem number 6. let's check problem number 6. Step 1, change the positive 2 to a negative 2, block it off. Now for my coefficients, for x to the 5th, we put a 4. What about for x to the 4th? Put a 0. What about for x to the 3rd? Put a 0. What about for x squared? Put a 0. What about for x to the 1st power? Put a 0. Our constant is negative 129. Now for all of your powers that are missing, make sure you put a 0. So this is for x to the 5th, x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, x to the 2nd, x to the 1st, and then the constant is always last. Drop down your first coefficient and start multiplying. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. Now combine these, we get negative 8. Multiply outside numbers. Negative 2 times negative 8 is 16. Combine these, we get 16. Multiply your outside numbers. Negative 2 times 16 is negative 32. Combine these, we get negative 32. Multiply your outside numbers. Negative 2 times negative 32, we get positive 64. Combining these, we get positive 64. Multiply your outside numbers. Negative 2 times 64 is negative 128. Now when we add these two, let's see, 9 plus 8 is 17. 2, 4, 1, it makes 5. So this would be negative 257. Now when we write our answer, drop it a degree. So if we start with x to the 5th, this would be x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, x to the 2nd, x constant. Remember, this last number is always your remainder. So dropping it a degree, instead of x to the 5th, we drop it to x to the 4th. So 4x to the 4th minus 8x cubed plus 16x squared minus 32x plus 64 plus remainder over binomial. And just like yesterday, if you don't want to add a negative, you can change this to subtraction, and then the 257 would be positive.